So, one misconception that I've seen a lot of animation reviewers say in regards to animation is how bad that the 2000s decade was, but when really looking at the catalog of animated shows that came out, it's nowhere close to even being the worst. I mean, granted, there were shows like Baby Looney Tunes, Coconut Fred, Shorty McShort Shorts, Robot Boy, etc., but after the dark ages of the 1970s, I really don't see where people are coming from. The closest that I could see this argument coming from is in regards to the second half of the decade. But do you want to know what shows came out during this half of the decade? Alban Star Racers, Chowder, Kappa Mikey, Phineas and Ferb, Hookah, and today's subject, Tom and Jerry Tales. And I know what people like A Critical Human are gonna say. How could you like this soulless piece of garbage while also saying that you dislike the 2021 Tom and Jerry film? Well, I'll tell you how. Tom and Jerry, before this show, had been hit with very unlucky circumstances. While I do love Tom and Jerry as a franchise, in fact, I love this franchise as much as Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry had not been as lucky as Looney Tunes was. Because after the Hanna-Barbera era, it feels like the franchise has not been able to find that second spark, whether if it's the brutal Gene Deitch shorts, the overly safe 70s show, or the incredibly rough Filmation show. The closest that this franchise has ever gotten to recapturing the franchise's roots was Tom and Jerry Kids or the Chuck Jones era. Even though they had problems, the Chuck Jones shorts felt incredibly sluggish in comparison to the Hanna-Barbera ones, and Tom and Jerry Kids misses one of the fundamental aspects of making slapstick funny, that being that slapstick is funny when it happens to an adult, and in Kids, they had this aged down version of Tom get beaten up like his adult counterpart, and their movies have fared even worse. The 1992 movie admittedly has that so bad it's good charm with the "we've got to have money" becoming a meme, but Tom and Jerry Willy Wonka in the 2021 film don't have this, with the Willy Wonka one being the worst of the two, but that doesn't mean that the 2021 film gets off scot-free with its horrendous comedy in Kayla. In comparison, what's the worst that Looney Tunes have ever gotten? I mean, there was the 60s era, which includes both the Dean Patty Freeling and the 7 Art shorts, as well as Baby Looney Tunes, which if you've seen my Total Drama Rama review, you know that I dislike that show so much that it turned me away from Looney Tunes for a while. There's also Lunatics Unleashed, which was the reason why the Looney Tunes franchise went on hiatus for 4 years until the Looney Tunes show. And there's also Space Jam 2: A New Legacy, which was marred with so much controversy that I'm not gonna bother discussing what happened there. And of course, there's what I think is the worst thing to involve Looney Tunes, which is Looney Tunes Acme Arsenal, even though that's a video game. But even with all of these worst things to involve that franchise, Looney Tunes had so many other shows that basically outshine the worst ones. Meanwhile, Tom and Jerry barely has much. Outside of the Hanna-Barbera shorts, this show, and debatably the 2014 show, and its New York follow-up, a lot of the shows that came out of Tom and Jerry were not very good, and well, getting into this review right away, big statement I know, outside of the Hanna-Barbera era, Tom and Jerry Tales is one of the best things to come out of this franchise, at least in terms of the ones that involve their shows or shorts. I like the Magic Ring, Blast Off to Mars, and Fast and the Furry, but most of the other DTV films were either forgettable or outright bad. Especially the Willy Wonka one. So, in regards to Tom and Jerry Tales, while I do think that this show is just good, for the record, a 7 out of 10 means that I think that the product is enjoyable. The shows and movies that are 8 out of 10 and above, I do feel very strongly about, but in comparison to so many other Tom and Jerry things that came out, a 7 out of 10 kind of series is amazing for this show in particular, and in comparison to the last show that I reviewed in production order, Rent-A-Girlfriend, this show is an absolute breath of fresh air. So, what makes Tom and Jerry Tales so good? Well, similar to SpongeBob seasons 9B to present, yes, I do like those seasons of that show, outside of season 14, don't at me, Tom and Jerry Tales honestly feels like a love letter to the franchise. There's a lot of callbacks that this show makes to the original Hanna-Barbera era, but at the same time, they do it in a way that makes this show have its own identity as well, as opposed to the 2021 film, which basically steals jokes directly from the original era. This show comes up with its own material. I just love this one joke in Game Set Match, where Spike says that if Tom messes with his boy, that he was gonna do a bunch of stuff to Tom, while also doing these things to him at the exact same time. And when you really pay attention to the credits of each episode, a lot of the people involved in this show is why a lot of the aspects of the show feel as special as they are. There are a lot of people that worked on the original Ren and Stimpy that are also involved in this show, such as Richard Purcell and Jim Gomez. A lot of them are clearly passionate about Tom and Jerry, so a lot of episodes come across as them trying to do their own spin on this iconic duo, and it could also explain this show's frequent adult jokes that they threw in, such as Tom writing his phone number for Miss Shapley in A Life Less Guarded, or even in the episode Freaky Tiki, where this fire element woman named Peely has an appearance that somehow flew past the censors. That is except for Asia, where her scenes are entirely cut out. But this does make sense when you think about it, because the original shorts were for adults, but they were tame enough back then to where they can be considered family friendly now, and this show came out long after Animaniacs, and all of the adult jokes that flew past the censors there, and there are even some status quo changes that this show does that also give this show its own identity as well. The show has a lot of episodes where Tom and Jerry are either on the same level, or Jerry flat out loses alongside Tom. There's an episode where Jerry ends up getting Tom into trouble with his owner by grabbing all the food that was inside the fridge and taking them outside, which gets Tom kicked outside, leading to the rest of the episode having Jerry getting a taste of his own medicine by having to deal with this ant. But there are also some episodes where Jerry loses alongside Tom, or they're on the same page. But they do it in a way where they're reminiscent to the shorts where they try to catch a baby, even though I personally think that Tails executes this way better, rather than the 70s show. Scolding hot take, but the episode where Tom gives Jerry to his crush as a gift, but the crush decides to keep Jerry as a pet instead of eating him, basically trumps the Chuck Jones era's take on this short. Not just because of the fact that Tom is actually antagonizing the situation rather than Jerry doing this, but Jerry doesn't win in the end. The female cat is just as angry with both of them in particular. And while we're on the subject of this topic in particular, some episodes of this show do feel like they're remakes of episodes from other Tom and Jerry shows, such as the Tom and Jerry comedy show for instance, and in most other cases, this would be a major problem in particular, such as in Camp Coral, which more often than not used episode concepts from the original SpongeBob series and turned out to be far more inferior as a result, especially with the episode Camp Cow, which had a running gag of characters wanting to step in cow droppings, leading to a very disgusting ending where SpongeBob actually kisses his shoe after he steps in it. Tom and Jerry Tales basically takes the concepts of the episodes that it's copying off of and actually does something with it. For instance, one episode is very similar to Kitty Hawk Kitty, but this episode is far superior to that episode for the obvious reasons being that they actually do things in this episode. The episode is funny, and most importantly, it actually feels finished. Also, Tom and Jerry Tales has a definitive snow brawl episode because of the fact that the episode doesn't start off with Jerry antagonizing Tom. Tom and Jerry in this episode are basically just having a fun snowball fight. Basically, snowball effect from SpongeBob if it was 100% silent. And that's actually another thing that I like about this show, and that it's its creativity, and its realization that not every episode has to involve Tom and Jerry chasing each other, and that some episodes can involve them just playing around with each other. Being someone who was very into video games in 2011, Digital Dilemma was an episode that I watched a lot back in the day. Fun fact, when this show started airing on Cartoon Network in 2011, I thought that this show was actually new, because that's how timeless that this show feels. You could basically air this show alongside some of the other shows that Cartoon Network has on now, and you wouldn't be able to tell when this show was aired, down to how good the animation is in this show. Granted, it's not the Hanna-Barbera era levels of quality, because to be fair, this was a show that aired on television, so the impacts are not going to be as strong, but they more than make up for it with the colors, backgrounds, and attempting to get up to the levels of the originals and going all the way. But with that said, there are some bad episodes that you are going to find in this one, I guarantee it. Granted, these episodes are nowhere near as bad as the worst episodes from either the Gene Deitch era, or especially the Tom and Jerry comedy show, and I don't know if they're bad enough to make it it into a worst episodes of good cartoons list, though admittedly, the Hanna-Barbera era did have bad episodes too, such as the one where Tom's owner refuses to let Tom eat until he'd catch Jerry, despite the fact that Tom did nothing wrong, and Tom and Jerry Tales' worst episodes have this problem too. The episode Feeding Time, where Jerry actively tries to get Tom into trouble because he heard Spike threatening Tom about not feeding the animals, or the episode where Tom is on a date with this other female cat, and when he wins a piranha, the piranha in particular starts to stalk him throughout the episode, and the cat that he's on a date with in particular gets mad at Tom for literally no reason, choosing to take out her anger on Tom instead of the piranha. But these episodes are far and few between, because Tom and Jerry Tales is a very fun show for the most part. Though, it is very devastating that this show was as short-lived as it was. And why did this show only last 26 episodes? Well, like I mentioned before, a lot of animation reviewers like to stick to this notion that the 2000s decade was one of the worst periods in animation history. And while I agree that the second half of that decade had a lot of bad shows and movies, not every show from the second half of that decade was bad. Chowder and Puka are great shows, and I will stand by that. But on top of the fact that a lot of the shows from the second half of the decade were not well received, they were also not doing very well. And Kids WB, the Saturday morning block that the show aired on at the time, was also going through a decline of its own, with a lot of the shows either not doing so well, or they were very poorly received. Not to mention, Kids WB was losing a lot of its viewership because Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, and especially Cartoon Network were basically taking the kids' attention away from Saturday morning cartoons entirely. And around that same time, Kids WB and ABC Kids were the only Saturday morning blocks that were on, because a lot of the big animation studios at the time were only focused on their main channels. Also, this show came out around the exact same time as two shows in particular. Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, which is what was considered as the ultimate black sheep of the franchise until Velma came around, and Legion of Superheroes, which I don't see many people talk about. So, with better options that audiences could go with, this probably resulted in them turning their heads and going elsewhere. Being as honest as I can, they should have moved this show to Cartoon Network, because I guarantee that this show might have done better there than on Kids WB at the time, especially given that Pokemon moved to Cartoon Network. Plus, Tom and Jerry was more popular with Cartoon Network than they were around WB, because Cartoon Network's identity was started by Hanna-Barbera characters, and I believe that the show might have lasted longer if that happened, because while yes, this show had way more episodes than the 70s show, the Filmation show, and even the Gene Deitch era, 26 episodes is still incredibly small. Tom and Jerry Kids of all shows lasted longer than this show. But no, instead of us living in a timeline where this love letter to the franchise got moved over to Cartoon Network and got to have a good run of 52 or more episodes, Johnny Test got to have this luxury instead, which we're all so grateful for. But like I said before, I did enjoy this show. It's not top 10 shows I reviewed good, but for a franchise that had been through the many ups and downs in its lifetime that this franchise had been through, being a show that is simply good is amazing in the context of Tom and Jerry.